Hello, I'm Emily McGovern, and my thinker is Sarah Deer of the Muskogee Creek Nation. A little background information on Sarah Deer. She was born in the year 1972. She is a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation located in Oklahoma. She attended Kansas University for her bachelor's degree, and that's where she went to law school, where she received her JD, which is essentially a doctorate of law. She is now a distinguished professor at her alma mater. She is also taught at Minnesota University in St. Paul. She is a lawyer, and she is Chief Justice of the Prairie Island Indian Community Court of Appeals. So this is a map of the Muskogee Creek Nation. It's in the green. As you can see, it's just below Tulsa, Oklahoma. She has many areas of research and study that she has taken a lot of time to learn about. So some of her research fields are tribal appellate courts, Indigenous legal studies, Indigenous feminist legal theory, federal law reform, criminal jurisdiction in Indian country, violence against Native women, and Native language. She also teaches subjects at her university such as gender, sexuality and the law, Indigenous women, criminal law, and law and society. She has published many books, and I have an example of a few. So this book is called The Beginning and End of Rape, which was published in 2015, Confronting Sexual Violence in Native America. Her next book that I featured was Tribal Criminal Law and Procedure from 2004. This is a textbook that is used in college courses. The final book that I featured is also a textbook used in college courses, Introduction to Tribal Legal Studies, which was published in 2004. Why Sarah Deer chooses to work with sexual assault. She said that most people would imagine her line of work to be very depressing, as you see some of the most heinous crimes every day, and you see people on the worst days of their life after something very traumatic has happened, but she doesn't think about it like that. She actually finds it very inspiring and rewarding to help women and teens heal after the most traumatic events of their life, and she likes being there to make sure that Native people are well taken care of and get the justice that they deserve. So sexual violence is actually a very big problem in Indian country, and it is crimes are disproportionately high there. So 84.3% of Native women have experienced violence, compared to the national average, which is only 33%. 56% of Native women have experienced sexual violence, and the national average is 17%. PTSD rates are 4.4 times higher amongst Native populations. 29.3% of Native members of the LGBTQ plus have been victims of hate crimes, and 85% of lesbian and bisexual Native Americans have experienced sexual violence. One thing that Deer advocates for is more inclusive SARTs. SARTs are sexual assault response teams. So a typical SART would include somebody like a registered nurse or medical professional, police officer, and a representative from the prosecutor's office, or even sometimes the defense attorney's office. But Deer advocates for the inclusion of a medicine man or woman for Native victims, which would allow for ceremonial and religious healing for trauma victims, and is very important spiritually to Natives who have deep roots, deep spiritual roots that aren't really understood by non-Native populations. So in order for them to properly get the help that they need after a very traumatic event, it is very important to have somebody representing them from their tribe and their culture. So that is one thing that she pushes for heavily, is for the inclusion of Native members in SARTs to help the healing process. She also helped on the Tribal Law and Order Act. Here's just a bit of information about it. President Obama signed the Tribal Law and Order Act into law on July 29, 2010. The Tribal Law and Order Act helps to address crime in tribal communities and places a strong emphasis on decreasing violence against American Indians and Alaska Native women. The act encourages the hiring of more law enforcement officers for Indian lands and provides additional tools to address critical public safety needs. Specifically, the law enhances tribes' authority to prosecute and punish criminals, expands efforts to recruit, train, and keep Bureau of Indian Affairs, or BIA, and tribal police officers. And provides the BIA and tribal police officers with greater access to criminal information and sharing databases. It authorizes new guidelines for handling sexual assault and domestic violence crimes, better evidence collecting, and providing better and more comprehensive services to victims. It also encourages the deployment of more effective prevention programs to combat drug and alcohol abuse amongst at-risk youth. So one thing that is important to note about tribal nations and Indian reservations and nations is that they have their own legal system, and the federal government does have some oversight on that, but for the most part they are autonomous. They don't necessarily have all of the laws and regulations, but this act helped provide more resources for those tribal governments to combat sexual violence, since it is such a disproportionate issue in Native American lands. So more about the Tribal Law and Order Act. So Deer actually worked closely with President Obama to create this act. Although it did have some victories, she also has many criticisms about how the act was implemented, saying, "It is very disappointing. Many of us worked so hard on this legislation." One of the main problems with it was that it did not give enough authority and resources to the BIA, so it's not enforced very well. And it has brought not enough change, which is not necessarily a fault on Sarah Deer's part, but more the fault of the bureaucracy. So another thing that she worked on was the Violence Against Women Act of 2013. She worked with President Obama once again when he reauthorized this act. So the Violence Against Women Act of 2013 recognizes tribes' independent power to exercise special domestic violence criminal jurisdiction over certain defendants, regardless of their Indian or non-Indian status, who commit acts of domestic violence or dating violence or violate certain protections in protection orders in Indian country. So prior to this, Indian reservations did not have the authority to prosecute any non-native, non-citizen members of their tribe, regardless of the crime, which made crimes easy to get away with in Indian country, which also leads to such a high sexual crime rate. In fact, in an interview with Sarah Deer, she quoted that 93% of rapes in Indian country are interracial rapes committed by somebody who is not Indian, committing rape on an Indian or a native. So in conclusion, Sarah Deer has devoted 29 years of her life fighting for Native victims of sexual assault. She has helped create multiple pieces of useful legislation, written many books, and helped countless women get the justice they deserve. Sexual violence in Native populations is an alarming issue that would go nearly unnoticed without the work of Deer. And just here are my sources that I used for this paper. Thank you.